game of drones. Why are drones the new dragons? Matt Dunlevy, drone expert.
It's a funny question because in the People's Republic of China, some of their largest and most capable, quote, drones are actually called the dragons. And so, I've heard that there's a million different puns in the drone world that are the sky's the limit when it comes to those puns. So, I do think that, kind of to the actual context of the question, when I was first getting into the UAS sector, there were these people who were talking about how drones or unmanned aircraft systems or remotely piloted aircraft are never going to be the quote end all be all. A lot of it also came from the concerns that manned pilots, the people who understandably want to be sitting in an aircraft while it flies because there's nothing like it in the world. I would argue there's nothing like, being on a UAS operation as well. Um, but there was this clamoring about, we don't want the UAS or RPA to replace the manned pilots. That they want to be up there in the war in Ukraine and elsewhere. I mean, non-state actors, nation states alike, are that these unmanned aircraft systems are proving, especially with the combination of they and artificial intelligence, to be a lot more than was expected, and themselves also the perhaps main reason, maybe alongside artillery, why the Russian advance has been, I don't know if I could say thwarted, but stymied, and they're starting to lose ground too.
Pilots are reluctant to give up their role to drones, but drones don't just replace planes. They're observation, they're used for smart bombs, and it looks like they're also replacing munitions in some ways. Is there too narrow of a thinking about drones just being re- replacements for planes?
Fantastic observation and question. I would liken it to, in the advent of the intercontinental ballistic missiles, there was this tug of war between the United States Air Force and the United States Army about how the Army would claim that these are just large ground-based artillery pieces and that they should fall under the purview of the Army. And the Air Force eventually won that. And so are drones just a different way to be shooting artillery? I mean, they literally come out of tubes that look like mortar tubes. There's smart munitions, loitering munitions, things like that. UAS, RPA are replacing many different, dull, dark, dirty, and war, the dangerous missions and tasks that traditionally are done by humans. And it's not just the flying, it's the ground-based robotics. You see it in agriculture. One of the, I would say, more interesting use cases right now that I've seen is how they are they're the CASEVAC. So they're the ground-based, they've got treads or wheels, and they're running up to casualties in the battlefield and able to, on their own, load a wounded soldier onto what amounts to a stretcher on wheels and autonomously or remotely bring them back to safety so that they can be treated and saved. Of course, you can't talk about what we're doing without talking about taking away the need to actually be attentive behind the wheel. I don't know how close we are to that. We're probably there, but are the people ready for that? So public perception comes into play on the self-driving vehicles, and it comes into play on the different use cases, not just in terms of munitions, not just in terms of manned versus unmanned pilots, a lot more than we ever thought there would be 10 years ago.
Because things are developing so fast, technology is always ahead of the policy that's supposed to regulate it. What right now needs to be taken care of, or do you see on the horizon with the drones that is going to be changing in terms of policy?
Yeah, policy has been the bane of many's existence in this industry. Uh, the issue of not just being able to fly UAS for business purposes, people kept saying, permissions are coming around the corner next year. Next year, I'll be able to fly drones for commercial purposes. And then they came around and they were too stifling for anyone to actually do business missions with UAS at scale.
Let's
And
stop there
then,
so people can understand that, though, because when you say about business, I think agriculture use, I think
yeah,
archaeological.
yeah, versus ag, two big ones. In the utility sector and in the oil and gas sector are two of the biggest ones. You've got the robotics missions, drones that are actually stringing conductor wires, drones that are using to do precision application of fungicide, herbicide, pesticide in agriculture. And you've got even drones that are carrying bricks and laying bricks to build buildings. Those robotics types from the drones that fly. Also, so surveying in the engineering world is another big use for UAS in the business side. And all of these also even have purposes in on the military side as well. So if it can do something in business, most likely it can do something for defenses. I mean, it was around the corner to be able to fly it all for profit. Then because it was too much, it's like next year they're going to come out with another regulation that means we can actually fly without breaking the law, because everybody and their brother would have had something to say for the first set of regulations under 333. It was called Section 333. And now everyone's thinking for business, next year or around the corner or in a few years, we'll be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. And that is the regulation that is where the manned and the unmanned pilots will really be, more of a conversation, because, the ability to stay up all day as a manned pilot can is just too much to compete with in terms of the economics or the unit economics of flying with UAS. We're better for point inspections instead of broad swaths of data collection.
Drones have such a financial advantage. And I mean, any type of value metric, whether it be human lives replacing medics on the battlefield or own costs compared to like a 55mm shell, though, because it's so money saving. And in some areas, like in Ukraine, they're being built in people's basements. How is that affecting the overall competition of what drone manufacturers are doing? Are there regulations in the United States that are holding back development? And is the competition getting bigger with things going on in other places?
That's a financial question that can go in both directions. With the tinkerer in their garage, and you're going to build a drone that can do something the same size as an artillery shell for less, perhaps, than the cost of an artillery shell, and perhaps. Whereas that same, if you turn it into a straight up silver bullet, like a Switchblade drone that AeroVironment makes, and it's interesting because we've actually had these for a long time. They've had a long time to iterate on them with eyes and that accuracy and precision. So the ordnance in that sense, even though it's the same size, is going to cost a lot more. So depending on the mission and depending on who builds it at scale, how smart it is, how good it is, side of the cost of an artillery shell. You brought up that drones are replacing medics. And a very interesting article came out recently from Parameters, which is a journal at the United States Army War College, about how the Ukrainians are saying that they covet a KIA more when it's an enemy drone pilot than they covet a KIA that's an enemy sniper. And that, what this war, the single most important battlefield profession, other than a combat medic, which can be replaced by drones, are the drone pilots themselves, which to me is crazy. I mean, you see these comparisons to World War I and World War II, and the psychological toll that it would have taken on the people, say, in the Vietnam jungles or in the trenches of World War I. And drones are like the machine guns, bringing the advantage to the defensive again. But these drone pilots are kids. Psychological toll that it's going to be taking on them to see an enemy drone, because if you see one and they see you, chances are you're going to be running, and chances are they can fly faster than you can run. Just so happens that a lot of the times the people who are best suited to be flying these small or building these small or repairing these small UAS, they're very young, and there's a question of whether they should be on the front lines at all. It just so happens they have this skill that's more important than anything other than a combat medic.
A year ago, we talked about how dangerous it would be if somebody let the genie out of the bottle and let AI just pilot the drones. On the one hand, you could hear how it'd be an attractive thing to do because you'd be saving those lives of these admittedly young soldiers. But what if the development's been in the past year? AI is big in the news more than it was the last time we talked. How do these two things come together, drones and AI, right now?
It's probably just a matter of time, not the rabble rouse, but I would say that since the last time we spoke, there's good indications, if not outright evidence, that artificial intelligence has been not just used to process the data that the Russians collect with their UAS or that the Ukrainians collect with their UAS, has been used to pilot the aircraft themselves, flying in swarms. Once we saw that there was a large drone swarm where a Russian mothership type bird was doing command and control with a flock or a swarm of a lot of smaller, most likely loitering munitions, each one of them with a different mission, and or all of them just with the mission of being a kinetic weapon. So it's going to take artificial intelligence to keep that mesh of aircraft in the air. And then you also see not just the mothership type drones, and to effectively relay command links between themselves and other kinetic or ISR missions, most likely to reduce that human error and keep those links strong. There's going to be artificial intelligence in the way that those birds fly as a great power, using artificial intelligence at an incalculable scale against another great power. Of course, artificial intelligence is going to be used in such a conflict, and then there is no going back. And that's one of the central points that, I've cited numerous different articles and monographs on that in the class that I built at the University of North Dakota, which is UAS ethics. And, what's the ethical consequence of large scale artificial intelligence being deployed, similar to nuclear weapons being deployed, but it's only when it's at scale, and it's when it's a great power versus a great power. Right now, I wouldn't say it's at true scale, and I wouldn't say it's directly the United States fighting against Russia with artificial intelligence.
With drones playing such an important role, people aren't just wanting drones, they're also wanting to develop drone defense systems. You're not just a military historian and a drone expert, but you're also the chair of the National Defense Industrial Association, the Northern Tier chapter. So you're working in the business. You know other people in the business. You've got people developing drones. There's got to be the other side of it, people that are developing systems to fight against drones. Or are they the same people?
Instances, they are the same people. And, there's this sense of graduation from UAS operations to counter UAS operations. And counter UAS operations are obviously, and on their face of it, defense related almost only, or security related. For example, law enforcement officials would need to know how to use counter UAS. But I mean, the vast majority of that is going to be in the defense sector. To truly fight against a drone swarm, because I can only imagine what it would be like to see a small UAS buzzing around my face that is obviously not my team's drone, and I'm on the front lines in Ukraine. I would expect that I need to be running, or something bad is going to happen. The same thing is if I am not on the front lines and all of a sudden I see a giant swarm. And, just being in the drone industry, I don't even know if right off the bat I would be able to tell if it's a drone light show and it's a good one, or if it's a nefarious swarm and I need to start running and I'm just in a city. It's really a war of signals. It's an electronic warfare war. So the question, I think, becomes, what do you do about a giant swarm that's coming after you? And so
Are
you've got,
EMPs there an option?
so EMP most likely would be an option. I would say, that's one of the most effective options. But then, depending on your proximity, down all the cars in the area, all the other different EW type or electronic, equipment is going to go down temporarily. Those birds are going to crash. So, if they come back online, are they going to be able to fly again? Maybe some of them can. That would be a nuisance. a car will come back online and still be operable. A bird that comes out of the air is going to be curled up in a ball. But otherwise, also the uh, the counter swarm. I mean, you can still use some. There's direct energy weapons. There are other ways to do mass jamming. There's going to be a lot of things out there that you or I could not imagine that probably exist already, and hopefully they do for the right side. It would be swarm versus swarm. Detect a swarm that's inbound fast enough to get your own swarm in the air. And most likely, if you get your own swarm in the air, it's going to be an air-to-air swarm instead of a more, attributable. So there's the term attributable, like if it goes down, you can attribute it to which nation state. But then there's also the question of what attributes do those drones have? So the first one that's coming at you might be, it's got the attributes of, air to ground and ISR. Whereas if I put a counter swarm up in the air, it could be solely for counter swarm air to air, and my swarm's going to take that swarm out. So that's that's one other way. The question is time, and the question is, well, what if I don't have my own swarm at the ready to beat up on another one? So there's a lot of different ways, and there's a thought though, because we're talking about the relations to different wars. Right. So we can draw upon World War I with the advantage to the defensive. Another one is from the great air power theorist Julio Duhay. He in the 1920s he published a book called The Command of the Air, and he theorized. And this is one of the greatest military theorists of air power in history, if not the greatest. That the bomber will always get through a counter swarm. Chances are one of those birds is going to get through, and then it's going to be able to do its Death Star trench run and accomplish its mission. So, and then the other idea is in that same theory applies to nuclear weapons. So if you see a swarm or just a formation of B-52 bombers, and they're going over the pole to in a hypothetical strike, the Russians are going to throw everything that they have at them, but most likely that theory will ring true, and one of them is going to get through, and it would put a nuclear weapon on a Russian population. As horrifying as that thought is, Russians would throw at them, and that's it. That's it. That's game. It's game over. If one of those things falls, that's over. And you could think of something so critical that that one drone gets through the counter air swarm and inflicts pain that is unacceptable. Taking out an entire city, but it could be taking out, the strategic command and control node of something that if we lose it, we lose too much. So that's, kind of the scary side.
The attributes of the drone, what was the expression you used?
So it can be attributed, if a bird goes down, I can attribute it to that country. So for example, we see these birds come down that were shot down, and you see the Iranian writing on there. So we can attribute that bird to Iran. Or attributable also can be, this is what attribute this aircraft has. It's supposed to be a relay drone. Or I attribute, this one is a kinetic strike drone, or this one's just for ISR, things like that.
Wasn't this the problem in Jordan? News reports were coming out at the end of January. 3 U.S. servicemen were killed in a drone strike. The United States has already retaliated, but some of the early discussions were that they didn't realize it wasn't one of their drones. What could have been done better in that situation?
That's one of the big questions in the industry right now. It's more of a technical one that I can comment to, but yeah, that's IFF, the identification friend or foe. One of the reasons why in the United States we've instituted something called the remote ID regulations. So drones have to have a broadcasting license plate in the sky, so I can tell whose bird that is. If it goes down, I can track it back to the operator, things like that. But these guys who are flying these drones don't have any reason to be broadcasting anything. In fact, they want to do the opposite. So we would have been able to track them in some way, but there's especially where they're at, you can't hold it against the U.S. soldiers in Jordan. I mean, we want to learn from it, but there's just way too much going on for fingers to be pointed for not realizing whose bird is what. So that hurts, and we need to adapt in quote wartime to be able to defend against that and to be able to attribute. Usually, what I've seen is, for example, with the Shaheds, um, you see the Iranian stuff after the fact. We need to be able to attribute and identify while the birds are still in the air. There's many different ways we can look to that. In terms of policy, like shoot first, ask questions later. Because at the end of the day, if it's safe, that's just a drone. I mean, it's money, but and that's better than lives.
Let's talk about the economies of drones, because the Reaper drone, everyone was familiar with that. Early on in the full-scale invasion, 2 Russian MiGs dumped jet fuel on this drone. These things cost between 20 and up to like 40 million. And now we
Mhm.
have the stories of drones being produced in people's basements with 3D printers for around $1,000 US. When we're talking about military procurement, why is the US spending 30 million on a drone and the Ukrainians are doing a lot of damage with something that they bought at Radio Shack?
Ukrainians are also using different types of unmanned aircraft systems. And right now, in terms of micro targeting, everyone is a target. The larger the drone, even they are targets. The Russians have advanced A2AD or anti-aircraft area denial, and that means they can take a lot of different types of drones and birds out. The Reapers are extremely advanced, and I mean they are fantastic platforms. They're probably the best of their type in the world and have been for a very long time. General Atomics and just the professionalism in their manufacturing is something that can't really be matched over there. We're kind of taking a playbook out of I guess the Cold War. Like we're out buying, we're out spending, and hopefully we keep doing that because it seems to be working. The Russians, the need for the small UAS is also starting to very much so register with leadership in the United States government. So, for example, the recent announcement of the replicator program from our Deputy Secretary of Defense is a huge step in the right direction. And we'll be seeing Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. These Radio Shack drones, they're Group 1. Those Reapers that they're dumping fuel on, those are Group 4. And so the Russians are being complete jerks on that. Just like unprofessional flying, provocative, the chances of miscalculations leading to drastic escalations from stupid stuff like that, I think is kind of indicative also of their thought process. And it's very disorganized. Hopefully doesn't boil over. And, again, like hopefully cooler minds will prevail. The Ukrainians are able to produce the small ones. They had some really good initial success with some Group 3s called the Bayraktars. Those were out of Turkey. Great birds for them in that conflict. And I'd say that very few places have I mean, they're just light years ahead in what they know about drones right now. Light years ahead of everyone else in the world. The Ukrainians for sure, and you'd have to imagine that the Russians are pretty well up there in terms of firsthand experience. And one thing that has not changed about the character of war is that war is a competition for production, and we're seeing that with all different types of new innovations in the UAS and the productions of every different type of group of UAS just being totally magnified.
US military procurement is slow. And when you have new technologies and startups, by the time that the US military is ready to invest in these new ideas, either they've gone bankrupt or they've moved on. How can the United States play this new Cold War, this outspending game, if they're not going to amend these systems?
And so that is a huge question that has percolated all the way up to the highest levels of command in the U.S. military services and the Department of Defense and elsewhere as well. Traditionally, what we used to publish as a country out of the Pentagon was the National Defense Strategy, or we would also publish something called the National Security Strategy. This year, for the first time, only a few weeks ago, the Pentagon published something called the National Defense Industrial Strategy. So how do we speed up the procurement cycles, and how do we have industry and the defense sector work faster and better together? In many ways, not every way, we can take a page out of what the People's Republic is doing. And I'm not saying vast government subsidies, but I am saying that a closer tie of civil military relations, particularly when it comes to the manufacturing and the development and the innovation with UAS.
This makes me worry a little bit. You have ties to the industry, and think back to Elon Musk and Starlink and the influence that he had over Ukrainian military strategy. It came out that the United States didn't exactly give Musk a blank paycheck, but they subsidized some of his technology without the control over what he was creating. And it led to the fact that he didn't allow Ukraine to use Starlink to guide some of their equipment to do damage against the Russians. And how is this balance going to be struck between encouraging this technology, having the most cutting edge things, being able to pay for it and have the military have this, and having these private companies be told, go nuts, guys, show us what you can do?
And I'm kind of still a little bit disgruntled with Elon's choice to do that. I mean, for the greater good, you keep Starlink on. And, but I mean, in his defense, and he might be the wealthiest man on earth, but money will still talk. And, he's going to have investors to report back to. And if they see that, he's losing his shirt on keeping Starlink on for free, there's going to be, sideways looks. Man, I still wish that they kept Starlink on for that. I would have been devastated if I were Ukrainian and then all of a sudden I lose my ability to communicate with my command post, or I lose my ability to communicate or access the internet or control my drones. I would just be cursing Musk's name, because their lives are on the line. And so, but otherwise, I don't know if you're going to see that again from that level. And I guess kudos to Musk for having it on in the first place. One of the ways we're seeing the United States, at least, get back, kind of moving this defense industrial base that is so strong. I would say that it's been a little bit more dormant lately until it kicked off in Ukraine, and now we're seeing production ramp up. And there was another article that's a 1939 type vibe. America did well then. We did well in the Cold War, and in no small part due to our production. And you see these programs coming out. The chief of staff of the Air Force, his name was General C.Q. Brown, was recently just promoted to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, came out with this very interesting thesis, so to speak, in a large document that he put out when he became chief of staff, that is. And it was about accelerate, change, or die. They're accelerating change in the procurement cycles as well. So now the United States Air Force has like these pitch days where different defense type companies can go and do Shark Tank almost with a panel of Air Force people. And if they like their idea, they will skip the entire procurement process and they will swipe a credit card, purchasing that product right there, which could have been this cycle of spiraling death time to then you see all of a sudden a company go bankrupt and they can't get that product again, and they can't innovate and iterate on that product again. So it's a good way to I think keep the that part of our economy moving. And I also think that it's just kind of an innovative new approach that the United States military is taking to keep war fighters over there as well equipped as they can and as fast as they can.
But one of the things that you had said was about production and logistics. And we know that there's been a microchips shortage in the United States. Has the United States picked up enough to make this kind of equipment in country? Relying on Chinese microchips does not seem like a really strategically smart thing.
No. And I was, kind of concerned when I saw Warren Buffett pulled out of the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company. So, that's one definite, place where microchips can be, procured. I think that when you say in country, whether you're talking about in the United States or can we make the microchips in, say, Ukraine, we're gaining that capability. I would say we probably already have it in the United States. It also comes down to materials, the actual materials that are needed to build, not just build, but to get the materials to build them with. It comes down to that question. But the mobile manufacturing concept is another thing that is going to be put at the forefront. So can we not just bring these aircraft out at scale, but the manufacturing plants or assembly lines that bring them, in addition to the assembly, say, lines that build the microchips to wherever they need to be, and it just so happens that they need to be in Ukraine right now and elsewhere, actually.
So you use the term platform. There's different platforms or systems for running drones. What is the difference between them? Does it go back to what they're being used for?
Well, I think the larger the bird is, the more likely or the more apt the term platform can be used for it. So, I mean, it's the Reaper, the MQ-9. I mean, it's a platform. Like you can stand on it as if it even were a platform when it's on the ground. From a messaging standpoint, the Reaper is a platform unto itself, but it's also a UAS platform.
Like an operating system, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Take me by the hand here, Matt. Okay.
So you could even use the term, the nomenclature. There's a lot of it. It's almost difficult enough to keep up with the nomenclature as it is with every new development in the industry itself. So there's UAV, there's UCAV, there's RPA, there's UAS, there's you can say drone, you can say all different types of even just the two UA ways to describe probably which is the most widely used term, drone, and drone that flies mostly.
Yeah, because they had the Canadian Ski-Doo jet ski drones too, which last year you explained to me it doesn't have to be in the air, it just has to drive itself.
Yeah, and we're seeing I think it's called the longbow. Some of these really interesting and I guess kind of scary. I mean, I don't know what to call this. It's a drone. Whatever it is, it's a drone. The longbow will fly. It's a fixed wing bird, and I think it's fully electric. Comes out of the People's Republic, and it can land on the surface of the water, and then it can go and swim like a submarine, and then it can surface again and take off again. You see multi-rotors like that. You see fixed wing birds like that. That would give me the chills if all of a sudden I'm on a boat, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of birds just pop out of the water. So and then where do you run?
You're not making me feel good about any part of this conversation, starting with the young people that are drone operators, going to the AI potential, to freaky bird submarine drones that could ruin even the nicest vacation. How do you deal with this working in the industry?
There are still swords to plowshares, right? So these UAS and and necessity is the mother of invention. So a lot of these technologies that are birthed out of war are used for commercial reasons that have real societal benefit.
I'm not sure what came first here. Were drones a military development that there's been commercial uses for? Is it a commercial development that became a military tool?
Great question. Wrote a master's thesis on this topic. Back in World War II, there were target drones. So using birds that were radio controlled that were, helping people gain efficiency when they're trying to do ground to air, anti-air. And then you've got in the Yom Kippur War, that was probably the first time that, the birds were called drones. One of the first times, or at least, they were like the loyal wingmen. So you had Israeli pilots were flying, I think F-16s back then, and you had the remotely piloted or I don't think they weren't autonomous, but they weren't commanded by the pilots in the air, and they didn't have a pilot on board. So that's when you saw them kind of larger, not necessarily just as targets. So in those two instances, I would say that they were first built for military purposes. And then you had, since the 1950s, just RC aircraft were a hobby. So there were recreational ideas then, and now they're actually commercial applications, probably when people started putting sensors and actual useful, types of payloads on there.
Where do you see the next big developments in the drone industry going? Which direction?
Well, in the UAS sector, I think that one of the biggest areas for advancement, and you're seeing this from the Russians, is the link. So they're using drones to relay their command links to each other, and endurance to keep up with those links. So are they using, the hybrid generators where they would use batteries to take off and then kick in a gas-powered motor to fly for a long period of time? Or are they flying fully electric? So in terms of battery technology, and then we're looking at sensor technology. So how accurate are your sensors in terms of their ability to identify whether someone on the ground is a civilian or if they're, a licensed combatant? How are we able to, like you mentioned earlier, detect drones that are coming in and then identify whose they are? And so the airframes themselves, I wonder if that's been kind of gamed out. We have pretty good ideas on how to design the actual, say, airfoil or the fuselage. But in terms of the artificial intelligence to fly the birds, the sensors that we use for that artificial intelligence to see and make their own decisions. Hopefully, I don't know if AI has been making lethal decisions yet. That's another thing where you can't undo that without a human on the loop or a human in the loop.
They're collecting a lot of data that we don't even know what it's good for. I'm assuming. And AI will probably be tied in to look at that data. What kind of developments do you see there?
You can see like with ChatGPT and with DALL-E, there are things that the AI can do that really surprises us. And that might be kind of just a known unknown, where we know that something good is going to, come from that, but we don't know what it's going to be. Keeping AI on these images that we collect with UAS helps us flag things. But what comes after flagging and identifying, I don't know if AI will just speed it up to make it more real time or what, but something extremely valuable will come from keeping AI looking at the data that drones collect other than just flagging.
Not only have we talked about a lot of letters, but we've talked about Reapers, Shaheeds, Bayraktars, longbows, switchblades, and you'd also mentioned different categories. Can you quickly go through the categories? Just
Yeah. They were Cat 1, Cat 2. There were categories, they were tiers, they were levels. They were every different time. And I think that we've settled on group now. So, group 1 is under 25 pounds. Group 2 is between 25 and 55 pounds. Group 3 is sometimes it's actually the resolution of the sensor that the birds carry instead of how heavy they are at their max takeoff weight. And then, group 3 is going to be somewhere between 55 to 1,000 pounds. And then I like to think of group 4 as something that's going to fly, for 12 to, 24 hours from 30 to 40,000 feet. And then, group 5 is just going to be some massive 737 size bird that is jet powered and flies, I don't know, at 50,000 feet or something like that. So it's size and then altitude, endurance, things like that. Most of the time, you can actually classify. I think most of the time they're actually all classified by weight.
Even if they have different jobs, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
But technically a class 4 could also be a suicide drone.
Yeah, I mean, a group 3 or a group 4 can be used as a kamikaze or a loitering munition in and of itself, but when they're that large, they're going to be taken out before they get to their target, and it costs a lot to put them in the air in the first place.
One of the things you find yourself explaining to people again and again about drones.
Well, it was a losing fight about trying to tell people to stop calling them drones.
Yeah,
And
you've used so many letters in this conversation, and since your vocabulary about how you refer to this, 13 months ago we spoke and you were very cautious with me. Now there was a steep learning curve here, Mr. Dunlevy. So you're referring to birds, and I'm assuming those are the ones that fly. So what should we call them? UAFs?
Drones are fine nowadays. Just calling them drones. It's just been accepted even by the industry players.
So you've lost the battle, huh?
Well, the battle of what word to use, but the fact that they are still there for good reasons is also something to bring to the forefront of everyone's consciousness, because we're talking about Ukraine here. So of course we're basically going to be talking about defense purposes. There are some humanitarian missions like having a stretcher on wheels that can drive itself. But the fact of the matter is, again, that there are a lot of very positive reasons that drones fly, the birds type UAS, and that at the end of the day, they do enhance a human's quality of life.
Matt Dunlevy is a military historian, a drone expert, and he teaches a class at the University of North Dakota on drone ethics and AI.